This week, Brian Honan, CEO of BH Consulting, joins us to discuss why cybersecurity is not just a technical problem. In the security news this week, Microsoft to block VBA access for most applications, but not all. Russia arrests its third hacking group. The metaverse of security challenges. $323 million in crypto stolen from the wormhole. And a rapping influencer allegedly launders $4.5 billion worth of stolen crypto. Next up, Qualys' Wheel joins us to discuss uncovering a major Linux policy kit security vulnerability dubbed PwnKit. All that and more in this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
And welcome to the show, but first let me introduce you to a man who sniffs his own packets, whether they're smelly or not, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 727, recorded on February 9th, 2022, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. We've got some special guests with us this evening. Mr. Paul Batista is here with us from Polarity. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I didn't know the Russians arrest hackers. Do you mean employ?
No, this is a second week in a row they've arrested.
Commandeered infrastructure. That's how we say it.
Commandeered infrastructure from the comrades.
Makes more sense.
Yes. Of course, Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us.
Where? Oh.
Sitting in a different seat. It's throwing me through a loop.
It's weird. It's where I can see you through the...
Yeah,
it's okay. It's like at home, when I have my webcam down, it blocks the two systems. So if I want to close a tab in the browser, like who does that, right, Tyler? I have to look around
go around. We can still see each other. It's good.
I can see it. There we go.
Up there on the monitors, Mr. Lee Neely is here with us.
Well, it's good to be here and enjoying a wonderful day and just
dropping shotguns,
That's it. Hey,
Inside joke. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us, rocking the scarf tonight. I like the scarf.
I've been carrying these forever. Actually, weirdly enough, I use it as a leash for my little one. If she starts running away, I just put it around her and pick her up by the
lasso.
back.
Yeah. Right. That's someone should call Child Protective Services. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. I'm joking.
To be clear, that's your child and not your wife we're talking about. Right?
God bless it. Yes, Janice is short, but she's not that short.
Different lasso.
Different timing, yes.
Yes, different setting.
Little one.
Let's see. Quick announcement before we get started. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to all of our podcast feeds. We've got a whole bunch of shows. New episodes get downloaded right to your device. You can join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and streaming platforms. We're on Twitch, and Discord is awesome. I get a lot of great tips and resources from our Discord server. I flagged a couple during our segment today. We did an a half day, a really light afternoon live stream, I guess you could call it. We had micheladas and did the triage tournament, which was really awesome.
It was a blast.
And, a quiz website got a free pen test. It's all in a day's work here at Security Weekly and from our audience. So
I'd say we found a 0 day, but I'd say a contestant found a 0 day.
Found a 0 day.
Yeah, we did not sponsor, authorize, or recommend that activity at all, but it was found.
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. Let's see. What are we coming up? Oh, we've got none other than Mr. Brian Honan, CEO of BH Consulting. Brian has acted as a special advisor to Europol's Cybercrime Center, founder of Ireland's first CERT. He is the author of several books, has been awarded the SC Magazine Information Security Person of the Year, and was also inducted into the Info Security Hall of Fame for his contributions to the cybersecurity industry. None other than Brian Honan. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
It's wonderful having you, Brian. I feel like you're a staple, a true pillar of the community to be here with us. You've been doing this for a long time.
It just means I'm old. That's all. Just been around for a long time,
Older and wiser. and experience.
Well, I don't know about the wiser part. Definitely older.
It's awesome, Brian. How did I want to? You haven't been on the show in a while, and I don't remember the story. So, how did you first get started in information security?
Oh, that's a good question. It's well, I started my career back in the 80s in IT, working for a company called Irish Life. It's the largest life assurance company here in Ireland, and my job was to look after these new devices that they were looking to bring into the business called PCs and a Wang mini system as well. The business all ran on mainframes, but over the years, the business moved onto the PC architecture and networks and LANs, and my job was to help bring those systems across, and obviously with that came a lot of responsibility for security, and that's how we got into it. I think sometime around 1990, we got hit with our first computer virus, and that's when I went, oh wow, this stuff is really interesting. How do we stop these things? And that's where I got hooked and have been involved in information security, IT security, cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it now, since then.
It's amazing how things change, but also stay the same as well. And I think we've tried to come up with a lot of different analogies and parallels to other industries. And I think safety in automobiles, I think you've given some presentations on this, right? Is that does that analogy still hold up? Because I question all analogies, because I think what we do, we're like special snowflakes, but maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, I think make an analogy to question analogies with?
I did. You picked up on that, huh?
So, but the phrase use special snowflakes is actually very well put there, because I think anytime people like me or anybody else start talking about moving away from the pure bits and bytes on the technology side of cybersecurity, and let's look at other ways we can help make systems more secure, make businesses more secure, make society more secure, and ultimately make the job of the criminals harder. We start talking about standards, we talk about certifications, accountability, professionalizing the industry. There's a lot of people who will push back on that and say, no, we don't need that. And I think analogies, while you're absolutely right, they don't match exact one for one on what we do, but it's a great way to look at how they can, if you talk it through, how you can apply the lessons to our industry. And I focus on car industry because about 3 or 4 years ago, I was chatting to my father, and he was, he still doesn't understand what I was doing for a living, and he kept saying, what are computers about? What's cybersecurity? And I was talking through how, as you mentioned there, Paul, about when I started off 30 years ago or so, how things have changed, but many things have stayed the same. And he then started talking about automobiles, and that when he was a young boy growing up in the west of Ireland in the 1930s, that how people were amazed with technology, how it was bringing changes to society back then, and the automobile was one of the biggest changes to society back then. But the cars back then were very basic. They had there's no safety features in them. In many cases, you didn't need to take a driving test or driving lessons. There was no seat belts, no comforts, no radios. And he even told me of one neighbor whose car would be cold in the wintertime. So what they'd done was, to keep the cabin of the car warm during the winter, is they cut a hole in the floor and cut a hole then in the exhaust pipe, so that the exhaust fumes could come into the cabin in the wintertime, and the heat of the exhaust fumes would keep them warm while they're driving.
Hey, I mean, it worked for a little while, right?
It worked for a little while. They cranked the windows down, but then
that type of heat will put you right to sleep.
For good.
Absolutely. But it got me thinking how over the years, automobiles were introduced as a technology solution, and it wasn't, the automobile industry was allowed to continue building cars and automobiles whatever way they wanted to do it. And it was only when the impact of these vehicles were recognized as having on society, be that through car accidents and the cost of the economy of people having accidents, and the government started to bring in regulations like speed limits, and then later on in the years you end up having to have people have to have driving permits or driving licenses, whichever term you use in whichever part of the world you're in. And then as accidents start to increase over the years as well, you ended up having standards on how you need to build a car. So if we all decided to quit the security industry tomorrow and set up a brand new automobile factory, we have to build our cars to certain standards with certain materials. They have to go through certain tests to make sure they're secure. And here in Europe, there are lots of certifications you have to get on your vehicle to make sure it is safe and secure. And drivers then have to be educated and trained. The infrastructure that we use our vehicles on has to be made safe. So you can see, you can take that analogy, how if you're looking today at the wreckage and the impact cybersecurity incidents are having on businesses and society, and the damage it's causing, and we've seen that particularly in the past 12 months. If you look at the ransomware attack in Colonial Pipeline, how a business was taken offline, and that had such a big impact on other parts of society and of the economy. Because gasoline was not available, you panic buying at the pumps. Because it was panic buying, the price of gasoline went up. Because gasoline went up, it had another impact on the price of food and the price of other materials, because transportation got higher. Then you had impact on families who, particularly those who would be in marginal incomes, who couldn't afford to pay for foods they were buying 2 weeks ago. And here in Ireland, we had the impact where the National Health Service. So in Ireland, we have a government agency called the Health Service Executive, which is responsible for providing healthcare to the whole country. So all the majority of the public hospitals and other public health facilities are all managed and run by the HSE. It got hit by ransomware, which meant the hospitals here in Ireland had to resort to pen and paper for weeks, and if not months in some cases, in treating patients. And that had an impact on people's health, because surgeries were postponed, and it's the middle of the pandemic. It's the last thing you want your hospitals to be taken to be impacted. So yeah, sorry, I did say start on Irish and get me to stop talking. It's going to be a problem.
Let me ask you a question. Was there no, this is great stuff, but was there an impact in health and safety, not just a postponed surgery or something, but did anybody die because of the hospitals going to pen and paper because of loss of efficiency? Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I would say, in my opinion, yes, there probably were deaths indirectly caused by this, because patients did not get the care that they may require. Now, are there official statistics to back up my opinion? No, that's not. This is my opinion. But I do think if in the whole country, if all the hospitals have to resort to pen and paper, and the medical practitioners do not have access to your medical records, and they're relying on you to remember what drug, your medical history when you check into the hospital, mistakes are bound to have happened, and outcomes for some people would not have been positive. And there is no actual number to say to back
how many died or whatever, but yeah,
but there has to have been some.
Brian, I want to go back to the automobile safety analogy for a moment, and I think we applied safety and security to the automobile industry, and it largely works because you've got a car, and we've classified what an automobile is. right? So if you were to, I like your train of thinking in, if we were to start up a company and start producing cars, like there would be all kinds of regulations we'd have to go through, and the DMV would classify what we're making as a car. I just had to go through my e-bike and figure out, how are you going to classify my e-bike? Is it a motorcycle? Is it a moped? Is it a bike? Do I need to and they have very stringent regulations to classify these things. We don't really have that with software. Like, how do you even define like what software is, right? And that's those fundamental building blocks to gaining some safety from these regulations, being able to classify things, right?
Absolutely. And like, even if you take software and hardware, like look at
what's hard,
the BIOS and everything else that is built in firmware and everything else, that is just as crucial. But I think also what we can learn from a safety point of view from other industries, such as the automobile, but also the airline industry, and I gave a keynote at Bars Button on that particular topic, is that we don't share information post a breach. Companies suffer breaches. It's very hard to get to the hub of the nub of actually what caused the breach. And an example I often use is the Equifax breach of a few years ago. We all know the story behind that there was a vulnerability in Apache struts that was exploited, and Equifax got hit because of it. But if you look at the details of it, Equifax were doing the good practices that we're all supposed to be doing. They did have a vulnerability scanner. They were regularly running vulnerability scans. It just happened this vulnerability scanner did not pick up the vulnerability, even though it was a known vulnerability. Now, the question I have in my mind, and I have still haven't got an answer to it, and it would be great if somebody could help me on it, is what vulnerability scanner were Equifax using? And why did it not pick up that vulnerability? Was it a fault with the scanner? Was it a fault with the configuration? Or did it pick up the vulnerability and the vulnerability management program didn't work? What was the ultimate root cause failure of that?
Yeah, I think in that case, Brian, the way I understood the story was it did find it was buried in results, and they never got to the right person. And having spent some time in vulnerability management, working for a vulnerability management company, that's pretty damn comming, right? And, and the most critical step, right? I mean, the scanners work to varying degrees. Knowing what you have is also a problem. But the one thing that'll really hurt you is if you don't tell the right people what to fix.
Correct. So if you take other industries, that information would have been quickly and rapidly spread out to everybody so we could all learn. And one thing I have to take my hat off to the health service executive for the breach last year is they engaged with PwC to do a post-mortem of the breach. So if anybody wants to learn the lessons learned from that breach and how to prevent Conti ransomware impacting your environment, go to the HSC website here in Ireland, that's hsc.ie, and download the PwC report. It's 137 pages, and it goes right through all the steps from it was an email with a malicious Excel attachment in the email, which was clicked on by a user on a PC that had McAfee antivirus software installed on it, but the McAfee antivirus software hadn't been updated for 12 months, and that was the initial foothold that the criminals got to get into that machine, and then lateral move across the environment for 8 weeks, and then they triggered the ransomware and brought the whole system down.
Yeah, and I feel like we have standards, but they're largely optional, right? Well, what's interesting in the automobile industry, we have standards the manufacturers have to follow them, but when they're doing a recall, it's up to the owner to bring that in to get it fixed.
Yeah, but we do have standards in the cybersecurity infrastructure industry. But if you don't like the standard, you can pick a different one and use that one. Like an example being is, and I see this with a lot of my clients, is that ISO 27001 is a very popular standard here in Europe, but many of many American companies who are looking to engage with European companies to provide them with services insist on SOC 2 reports. So there is a big mismatch, and I see that with our American clients trying to figure out what's ISO 27001 all about. And you've also got NIST, you've got various other ones around the place. So we do need to be more coherent and structured in how we tackle this problem, because at the end of the day, the criminals are the ones who are profiting from all this.
There has to be incentive, I think, to implement security standards, and certainly smaller businesses, it's not much of an incentive on the surface for them, right? And I think what
incentive is there?
Yeah.
There's no incentive for a small business to put any kind of security in place, because you're like, I mean, look. How many of us have gone to a meeting with the board or the C-suite of a company and gone, hey, there's a problem, we can get hacked, we can have an issue. Like, okay, what's the chance it's going to happen in the next 6 months or a year? Well, I don't know. All right, well then never mind. Not happening. We don't care.
Well, how many of us, coming back to my analogy of the automobile industry, you go and buy a car tomorrow, you're not having somebody come back to you a week later saying, oh, by the way, you need to buy seatbelts for that, and you need to buy crumple zones for that. You need to buy, more safety features. When you buy your automobile, it's all packaged. When you buy a security system, be that a PC or an environment or whatever, you have to bolt security on in the majority of cases at the end. Yeah. And small business owners, they're not IT people. They're running a business. They're an accountancy firm. They're a solicitor's firm or whatever. That's their core business. They're not trying to figure out, what vulnerability scanner should I be using? What antivirus product should I be using?
If only they could spin up Office 365 and it would automatically check to see if you're going to be password sprayed and enable two-factor authentication by default.
Absolutely. I think if we could just get MFA by default and everything, it won't solve a lot of problems, but it will raise the bar for criminals to get over it.
Yeah. I'm going back to my friend who runs the watch business, right? Local retailer. And like, what does he have to do to be secure? Like, he sells watches, you know what I mean? And, but attackers will find their way in. They'll find ways to make money. I don't want to spoil it because I want Tyler and I to do a big webcast on it. Tyler helped me with some forensics that I did for my friend. And because I'm like, dude, you shouldn't really have to deal with this. Like, I feel bad that you even have to deal with this at all. Like, you shouldn't have to.
On a similar type of thing, Paul, like we joke every time. There's a butcher in Johnston that we go to.
Yeah.
And you go in there and you go to check out, and at the door there's some huge, like 6'6" dude, like with really bad tattoos on his arms, just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the bouncer.
In the meat.
At the butcher.
At the butcher.
Because apparently it's a threat that people go in there and order up like a couple $100 worth of meat,
mm-hmm.
and then try to bolt for the door.
Good Lord.
Are you joking?
No.
And it's the same story, Larry. My local chipper, so takeaway for burgers and fries, as Americans call them. I was really surprised when last time I was there, and they had a sticker up on the wall. They were PCI certified.
Wow.
But that flows into corporate America too. We do this user awareness training now. I completely agree on getting users educated, training them, and providing them good knowledge around security awareness training. However, the level of sophistication today in attacks for phishing emails, being able to detect, bad links, all the things that we're doing to attack these corporations, a regular user, in fact, even some of my security friends might not understand or even know what to look for and how to identify if it's evil. So we can't expect end users to do the same thing and secure stuff. So this applies all the way back up to corp. How do we continually support these end users and people that shouldn't know? It's not their job to know. I want my surgeon to be good at surgery, not to know how to, protect his firewall rules or MFA his account. Well, we need to come up with technological means that makes this easy and is implemented by default.
I think it's a few points there on that, Tyler. Absolutely right. We shouldn't have large corporates relying or depending on somebody not clicking on a link to keep them secure. Coming back to that HSE post-mortem report. As I said, the initial breach was caused by somebody clicking on an Excel spreadsheet in an email. But why and how did that email that was malicious get all the way into the mailbox in the first place? So, as Paul said earlier on, everything is software. How do we make software more secure? I think it's going to be interesting over the next 2 or 3 years. A big impact, I think, that Europe, the EU, the European Union has had on the cybersecurity industry has been the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. That's really put a security up at boardroom level in a lot of organizations, particularly here in Europe. The EU is also introducing has introduced the EU Cybersecurity Act, and part of that act is introducing standards, security standards for hardware and software that will be sold within the EU. So, and the NISA, which is the European Agency for Cybersecurity, they are currently working on a certification standard for cloud services, and that should be coming up. That's probably the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, I think in security's sake, having the right level of regulation for the right vertical, for the right size of company is going to be important, because when you look at the automobile industry, barriers to entry are pretty high, largely due to regulation. You don't want to put those barriers on every single industry in the name of security and make it too hard to spin up a new business. But again, there should be incentives for folks to do that, and/or programs like you're mentioning that help people. Like, hey, if you're starting a new business, or maybe you have an existing business, there's a program where you can get like secure stuff. These people don't have IT folks. Is one group of businesses, right?
Yeah, but if you buy your car tomorrow, a new car tomorrow, you know that it's been regulated and certified from many of the components, except for the software.
I mean, there are recalls on cars. I mean, what was it? The Chevy Bolt started catching on fire. Yeah, like it happens. Okay, there are recalls on cars. There are updates on cars. Hell, now there are firmware updates on cars. So, I mean, I take your point well. But it's also a very different ecosystem and thought set, a mindset, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, it is. And as I said, an analogy is a crude way of getting us to think differently. And that's why I use the analogies of the automobile industry and the airline industries to enable us to have these discussions as to how do we become more transparent and more secure. And, we can keep writing as much code as we want, but even your afternoon today showed 0 days are popping up all the time.
But the other thing looking at here is that it's the consumer side. We've trained the consumers to prefer the automobile that passes all the safety ratings or the airplanes that don't crash very much. And it's the relevance. I'm reminded of the story of a friend of ours who went to a company, and he said it wasn't until he'd taken the security training for the 7th year that he finally realized the relevance. When you put that in the context of small businesses and understanding security outside of regulatory requirements, it's got to resonate. It's got to become visceral that we need to do this, much like safety with cars and planes is visceral. And I don't know how to quite get there. I like the idea of what Europe is doing with some regulations to really control what's being sold. But you need that consumer awareness to actually look for the seal of approval. Or am I way off here?
No, and that's part of it. So in Europe, you do have safety symbols or logos, and there should be the same things coming out with software, and that's part of what the EU is trying to introduce. Is that as a consumer, when you buy a connected refrigerator or connected toy or your connected car or your brand new PC, or you subscribe to a cloud service, that you have reassurances that they meet minimum standards of security. Doesn't guarantee it's 100% secure, just as the regulations in the automobile and the airline industries don't guarantee everything is 100% safe, but it forces the vendors to raise the barrier. And it means, I think what also is an important thing that it does as well is that the vendors who spend time and money making their products secure are at a competitive disadvantage at the moment, because they are competing with companies who haven't invested in security and are competing against them probably at a lower price for a much less secure product, but it might be competing equally or better on other features. So
unless Brian, unless you're Microsoft,
that can help.
Unless you're Microsoft, where you can make the platform and the security solutions all in one.
Yeah. Well, I have to say I'm quite happy I don't work for a cybersecurity vendor, because I do think Microsoft are a big juggernaut. They're going to railroad a lot of vendors over the next few years.
To me, one of the big takeaways of the analogy and really what we can learn from other industries is, how do we learn from our mistakes and not just keep repeating them? And the more we can kind of embrace that, and some of the takeaways from those industries are checklists and post-mortem investigations. We need to do more of those things, but not just do them to do them, but do them and make change off of the post-mortem.
Absolutely.
I think one of the ways that gets incentivized too at scale for the right size, the right vertical, is through things like cyber insurance, right? Like cyber insurance has a huge play in what they can demand in order to get policies. If your cyber hygiene, your maturity, the steps you're taking to be secure and do good security, if you're trying to get a large policy, by enforcing and requiring those things at your scale for your size of company, and you don't get the policy otherwise, or you get a higher rate, that incentivizes people to actually do good security. And those that can't or don't have the technical staff, they're probably not applying for it, and therefore you're not backing or putting a ton of money into it. So I think it starts to eliminate some of the risk with some of the smaller places that can't keep up, while still providing oversight for some of those big companies that should be doing a better job, and there's not an excuse.
Yeah, and question, I'll turn it over to Brian, because I know you consult with a lot of companies, right? And I know Tyler's done some of this work as well. But when you've got a business and they've got a customer, and there's an attacker that compromises the business and then scams the customer, who's liable, right? I mean, by scam, I mean there was money that was transferred in a bank transfer that was independent of the company, that went to an attacker's account because the attacker had compromised the company and scammed one of those customers. This seems to be a theme, Tyler, when I brought to you this case. This happens quite a bit in a lot of different industries and various size companies. The cyber insurance question, right, is I'll turn to Brian first. Like, who's liable for those damages?
Well, you guys are now cyber insurance is my trigger word.
Yeah, that's good.
Because I have, if you want to talk about cyber insurance, guys, we need more than an hour, because I have so many rants about cyber insurance. In short, though, I agree with Tyler. I think cyber insurance, when they get their act together, will be positive for the industry, because they will bring in proper structured risk assessment and risk management that we can work on. And it will force companies to raise the bar on protecting their information. But a lot of the cyber insurance policies I've seen at the moment won't actually cover that type of activity, because they will say that's fraud. Yeah. It's not a cyber event. It's somebody reacted to an email that came in and said, pay this money to this account, or they hacked somebody else's email account and transferred money, etc. So cyber insurance companies often don't cover that, and I think it really does depend on the jurisdiction you're in as to what laws will apply to that type of activity. But in many cases, if you have sent the money fraudulently somewhere and it belonged to somebody else, you still have to suck up that loss, and you end up having to compensate the person whose money you lost, or you take the loss yourself, and not your customer, basically.
Right. Tyler, what's been your experience? Yeah.
No, that's pretty spot on, and honestly, cyber insurance kind of sprung up, and it was a new way to make money. It was new things that had to be done for liability, and you see money. So where it's evolved from and where it's at now are two completely separate things. But you have this concept of where all these cyber insurance companies have taking in tons of premiums and paying out enough and still making a good profit. Well, we've seen that table tip this year with all the ransomware and payouts where they're not going to start paying some of these. You've got to be at a certain level to ride to get your policy renewed. They're doing much more scrutiny on larger policies. They're very careful about what they cover. And like you said, many of these don't cover some of the things that happen that they try and call fraud when they're clearly on the cyber front. So you really have to pick your companies wisely, and some of the bigger ones are doing a really good job of trying to get better at what they're requiring their customers to do in order to provide them a policy, and then not paying out as much. We've seen these huge payouts, which is for cyber insurance companies and policyholders to want to go get it. All the big companies want cyber insurance, so they don't have to pay that if they get ransomware. Well, it's kind of a backwards way to look at that. They should have a cyber insurance policy because they're doing good security, so they won't get ransomware, so therefore they have an insurance policy. So it's kind of the backwards approach that we're coming and catching up. And usually it is the cases that I've done and the recovered assets that I've recovered for places, it's always the company that wires the money that is liable for that money. They basically either lose that money and or have to go about recovering the assets. So if you don't pay an invoice because you wired it to the wrong account, that invoice is still due to the company that you're supposed to pay it to. Or if you're,
so whoever wired the money is likely responsible, right? Whoever the victim is of fraud, whether it was the customer or the company, because it can go either way, that they're liable. What's interesting is if cyber insurance were to start covering that, would we see an even larger uptick in this type of fraud because they're going to get paid from the cyber insurance?
Which is where we're at now, right? Like that's what they've been doing, and now they're starting to, if you are breached, you have to have a reevaluation. Your security needs to be looked at. They're looking at the policy, what you're doing in security, and in order to get a new policy or to do a new renewed bigger policy after a breach, it's become much more scrutinized by the good places. They've got really in-depth questionnaires. They're doing analysis on attacks. They're looking at all the things that they're supposed to do, and we're working with several insurance companies to try and push this for things that actually matter, things that make a difference. Two-factor on an internal network, I could care less about. That was actually a pretty highly rated question for not just one, but 3 different insurance companies. It doesn't stop most attackers. We use command lines and API calls, and we're coming through things that aren't going to get hit for MFA. Now, on the outside, that's different. So really educating their users through cyber insurance. If you want a policy, here's the top 10 things you got to do. Like make sure you get to this point just to get a base coverage. Those are things that are going to push industries because you have to have cyber insurance to do procurement, do contracts, bid on work, all the things that make you money. Those cyber insurance policies are what allow you to do that work.
Yeah, and I've seen some procurement questionnaires coming out saying, have you got cyber insurance? And if you don't, you're not allowed to bid.
Right.
The buyer doesn't even care what security standards you have. They just care about, are you insured? So
let me put that to ISO. I've seen RFPs where it's like, are you ISO certified? Because if you are, you can be part of this. If not, you can't. And I've seen ISO certifications where they ISO certify one control. So their scope is a little smaller than you would like it to be, but they're ISO certified on that one control. Now, it doesn't ask them, are you ISO certified on your entire control suite? No. It just asks, are you ISO certified? And they go, yes, we absolutely are. It happens to be that everything is labeled, including the cat, whatever. But I mean, they're ISO certified. It's and I've also seen cyber insurance questionnaires that are, do you have a firewall? I think it's my favorite one. That's the entire questionnaire, just to be clear.
But I would say anybody out there in procurement who is relying on that question, are you certified to ISO 27001? If the respondent answers yes, well, then you require them to send you the statement of applicability, which lists their scope and lists the controls they have in place. So
of course, you trust but verify.
Just having the certification, get the details of what they are certified against. Because I had that for a client once. They asked me to help them pick a secure data center for them, and we shortlisted down to 3. I went to one of the vendors who I thought was our number one choice because they had on the website were ISO 27001 certified. Rang the sales team, asked them, what's the scope of your certification? They came back and said, look, we don't know. We need to find out. 2 days later, the sales guy rings me back and says, "Yeah, Brian, we are, as a data center company, we are certified to ISO 27001. The scope applies to one rack in one data center in Amsterdam that can only be used by one Dutch government." So that the scope was just that one rack. It wasn't the data center that we were looking at, and you do need to be very careful when you're as you said, they're trust and verify what the standard applies to, so that you are buying what they say they're selling you.
Yeah, Larry, I think it was Mike Poore that told that story the first time where, I don't know if it was a questionnaire for compliance, or if it was Mike asking the question, like, does your traffic go through a firewall?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, show me. And it was literally a firewall, and there was holes drilled in the side, and the Ethernet cable was running through
the box.
Through the box.
It wasn't even powered on, but it was a firewall, and traffic was through a firewall.
Through it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We recreated that with a firewall and a pickaxe many years later.
Yes.
So there's two things here. Then that is, one, as cyber professionals, we really need to work with our procurement supply chain folks to help them understand security. They're not cyber professionals. I mean, we can tell them the questions asked, but we really probably need to help them analyze the answer. I've seen suppliers say, "Okay, I'm providing this service. It's hosted on AWS," and then they'll list all of AWS's certifications, relevant or not. I mean, you'll see. It's let's say it's a database, and they'll list the FedRAMP cert and the PCI cert and stuff that has nothing to do with the product, but the consumer doesn't seem to care or know. So I think we as cyber professionals have to step in and help them. I know we do that. I do that at my day job and work on things like cyber provisions to put on contracts, and we update them annually to make sure that they're relevant, as well as review the answers that come back. Because I want them to be really good at contracts and getting things moving and everything, and I'll help with the cyber stuff. They just need to, know how to keep us out of jail, and do it right.
It's interesting though. I want to go back to the smaller business retailer. I mean, even large retailers, right? But with PCI, I think PCI has done a good job of reducing credit card fraud. I think it's done a good job for certain level merchants in allowing them, forcing them to do some better security, and they largely have. Maybe enforcing some of those on the smaller businesses could help as well. Of course, that's really focused on payment cards, but if that required things like two-factor authentication, the other things we know they're going to prevent them from being popped, it could help things overall. What are your thoughts on PCI, Brian?
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, Paul. I think it has brought some good. My concern with PCI is that I think many companies see PCI as a target to achieve, that it's up there rather than it's a base level to get to, and stop it from there. But I think, coming on to the point about small businesses, again, here in Europe with the GDPR, that has brought cybersecurity to the fore of all businesses. So any business in Europe that processes personal data, and in Europe under GDPR, personal data is much broader than the PII definition that's in the US. Personal data is any information that can relate to a living human being. So that could be a description of you, it could be photographs of you, it could be your car registration number, it could be your home address. All these things are your personal data, and you're legally required to protect that data and have proper security in place. Also in the UK, they have a standard called Cyber Essentials, and if you want to do any government work, you have to be certified to Cyber Essentials. And Cyber Essentials is it's kind of like a PCI light type standard that as a small business you should be able to achieve it, and it's relatively good, and it demonstrates you've got the basics in place. So there are things happening, I think, to help the mom and pop and the small businesses become more aware and better of their obligations on the cybersecurity. Because I think, coming back to the point that was raised earlier on, we need to make the consumer and the small business owners aware of security and how they can better protect themselves.
And in those regulations, I think you're right, Brian, do help raise awareness. And from what I've read and heard, we almost had that here in the U.S. in 2001. However, September, so we had, what I'm told, and I haven't read it, but there was a similar bill, similar GDPR, that was pushing to be passed in 2001. Then September 11th happened, and we got the Patriot Act, which was like the complete opposite of GDPR.
Oh yeah.
Which is
and that's why Facebook's threatening to leave Europe at the moment.
Yeah.
And most Europeans have gone, see ya.
And I think that act is what kind of gave birth to companies like Google and Facebook to do what they do, because there are no privacy regulations like that here in the U.S. We need to come back to that, because I think it'll help level set things, but also, like you said, raise awareness. And I mean, other than regulation also has a downside. It can be a drag as well. Yes.
Oh, it can. It can be drag, and it can be it can be regulations for regulation's sake, and that's something that nobody wants. And it can also, I suppose, it can create a compliance culture. Just like that example of Mike Poor with the traffic through the firewall. You know, what is the basic minimum I need to do to get by? But we have that in all our industries. You know, like again, using a different analogy. Restaurants, they all have to have health and safety regulations and abide by them. It doesn't mean that every single restaurant out there is the most hygienic, and there are many restaurants who would fail health inspections, but they are still required to do it. And as consumers, we can hopefully be able to verify that by checking on the restaurant door where they pass the latest health checks, etc. But regulation by itself is not going to fix it. And I suppose my point being is technology by itself isn't going to fix the problem either. We need to marry all these things together. We need better technology. We need the technology to be much more user friendly. Like some of the prompts we get to give people choices to make themselves more secure, it confuses people. The fact that we have online services in the cloud, especially in the past 2 years with everybody working remotely, that MFA is not turned on by default is ridiculous. So we need a combination of all these areas to work together to raise the, as I said, to raise the bar. And we're not going to stop criminals from hacking, just like in the real world we don't stop criminals from committing crime. We're not going to stop them doing it in the cyber world either. But what we need to do is make their job much harder, and make the risk and the risk to gain ratio they have much lower, and make it a lot more difficult for them. At the moment, it's just too easy.
Yeah, and too difficult to, for example, set up a secure Active Directory environment. The more and more I learn about attacks in Active Directory and how to thwart them, I'm like, good Lord, there's good thing we have people like Tyler and others that are just engrossed in this stuff. But it's so hard to set up a secure environment. And then you kind of tack on like SSO, like now you've got other cloud-based hosted sites out there and applications. How do you tie those together with single sign-on? How do you know that your HubSpot or the million other tools we're using are also secured?
So can I throw a thing at you for this? I mean, because I've been quiet because I haven't wanted to say too much, but this is near and dear to my heart. Because
wait, Josh, are you feeling okay? You haven't wanted to say too much? You're right.
Well, I've got a stake in this because I'm running a nonprofit. We're trying to build a standard for small to medium businesses to actually be secure.
Stakes, yeah. CMDB being one of the analogies, right? To what was the thing in the UK you talked to do business with?
CMMC. You're talking about CMMC.
Sorry, CMMC.
Yeah.
Is the
Cyber Essentials is the
Cyber Essentials,
the UK one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm one of the executive directors of a nonprofit trying to build CMMC for commercial side of the market. So Brian, I'd actually love to talk to you in great depth at some point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
But the point is that, it's very difficult. And one of the things we've been running into is, all right, how do we get a small business and how do we tell them you need to do X, Y, and Z? And it's like the only thing we've come up with is that at certain levels and tiers, you sort of tier it. So a tiny business will probably they'll have email, they'll have calendar, they'll have, Office, and that's it. Maybe a CRM. And then the next tier up is a business that's added some sort of business intelligence or whatever. You tier the applications. So if you're running this application or this type of application, you're probably in this tier or above. Yeah. And that's the only way we've been able to do it to make it seem vaguely reasonable for a small to medium business. But it's a stone cold pain in the ass, because how do you, unless you have a mandate, and in the US, it comes from the insurance companies, the cyber insurance companies. If you don't have the mandate from them, you're not going to get people to buy in.
Yeah. So, and I think that's, why should I, the question every business owner is going to do, and I'm a business owner, is, why do I need to spend this money on this? Why should I do this? What's, whether that's cybersecurity or any other part of the business, why am I spending money in this? And what am I going to get back from doing it? So we do need to, incentivize and make people aware of why good security is good business. That can be a hard message, though, to get across in many ways. And I think the sticks that are going to happen will be cyber insurance. You're not, just as in my office, when I insure every year, I have to make sure it meets health and safety and fire safety standards, so that it doesn't burn down and burn all the staff, which would be cost savings, I suppose. But at the same time, I've missed them. But,
that was cold. That was just cold.
The point being is that to get the insurance, I have to make sure I'm meeting these standards. So I have to spend money to do that, and that's kind of the stick. But it's we do need to get a balance, and I think at the moment, though, and we've been doing it for so long now, and it disheartens me a lot when I see emails coming in from cyber insurance, cyber security companies threatening that the world's going to fall. I got an email this morning from a cybersecurity firm in Ireland trying to sell me cybersecurity, which I found ironic in one way. But the subject line of the email was, "Brian, your company network is vulnerable to attack." And straight away I'm reading that and I'm going,
no shit.
How do you know? Yeah, well, everybody's vulnerable. But then I was thinking,
wait, how
do you know?
Yeah.
How vulnerable am I? Did you just do an unauthorized pen test on my network?
Right.
But like that type of ambulance chasing.
Or did they call Tyler?
Maybe they know. But I want to talk about software for a moment, Brian, because I think it's interesting when we talk about regulation. And while they're all regulations for creating and producing software, I think you got to be of a certain size or a certain vertical before you start hitting regulations. But largely, any company can create software. You can create open source software, and there's no regulation. Now, on one side of me, I love open source, and I love the freedom, and I'm like, the innovation, we should be able to create software. But it comes with great responsibility. How do we put some kind of regulation around the software that's created?
It's a very good question, and I won't pretend I'm intelligent enough to give you a good answer to it. But I think when you see the executive presidential order that came out last May from President Biden about the securing the supply chain and S-bombs and all that, come back to the point was made once or twice during a conversation is first of all, you have to know what you have in order to protect it. And S-bombs and securing the supply chain, if you are going to provide a service and you're going to have open source components providing that, well, then you have to take on the responsibility of making sure that is secure as well. Now, the mechanics of that will probably also need to be ironed out. How do you make sure that somebody who's doing this as a side project and you decide to use their piece of software in your enterprise edition of a CRM, we have to figure that out. But that's why I enjoy working in cybersecurity, is that we have the difficult problems and we have to try and solve them. If it was easy, we'd be in a different industry.
Right.
I think defense in depth really matters here, because you have to assume that all your software vendors are providing you vulnerable software. As a software vendor, I hate that assumption, but I have to assume even as a
Paul, you produce
purchaser,
software. How do you feel about this issue?
as a purchaser of software as well, right?
Yeah, both sides.
And both sides, and we all are in some sense. So you have to assume that what you have and what you purchased is vulnerable, and have controls around it, and vice versa. If you just stop and say, "Hey, point fingers," we'll all be pointing fingers.
Yeah.
But when you start to say, "Hey, how do I level my security? How do you have full programs?" Now you start to get some defense that's actually defendable and can stand up against the adversary.
Yeah, I like your defense in depth, as kind of cliche as that sounds. When you listen to our interview with Wheel coming up later in the show, we talk about just how much open source code is out there, how many folks have looked at that code, and how it takes that, those special individuals to look at that code in that way to come up with like a really super easy Linux privilege escalation exploit that is super reliable and super stable. And you're just like, wow, that's been there for a really long time. And I bet I have software that has similar kind of bugs and I just don't know about them yet. And it takes someone's skill, creativity, and persistence is what we talk about in the interview.
We dodged the Log4j vulnerability, but I was just because we dodged the Log4j vulnerability, but I was not naive enough to think like that couldn't have been another library, right? Like, we don't use that. We didn't use that library, and we dodged that one, but just as easily could have been another library, and that's something to think about for anyone building software.
Right.
That's where the
I was just going to get the Log4j.
Sorry, Brian and Tyler started talking at the same time. Sorry, Brian, then Tyler.
Yeah, cheers, Paul. I was just going to comment there on the Log4j. We were working with one of our clients to try and determine what the impact was on all the software they use, and they sent out questionnaires to all the vendors, and one of the vendors replied back, says, you don't need to worry about the version of Log4j in our system. Our software is so old it doesn't even use log. Logging.
Well, we've got some more.
Okay, now we've got more problems that we didn't want to know about.
Yeah,
now we're going to dig into that because the problems go deeper than just Log4j.
They don't use Log4j. They use Log3j.
Mm-hmm.
We rolled our own encryption,
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
They use log IIJ.
Yeah. Tyler?
I think that's where that bill of sales or bill of goods starts to become a real critical piece, so we can quickly identify some of these. Like you guys are saying, like software today and SaaS applications are not they're not a single application, a single software company, a single package. That's a bunch of libraries integrated. That's maybe a front-end GUI. That's someone else's cloud infrastructure. All those pieces play into an attacker's mindset of how to go about breaking this stuff. So really coming up with fundamental ways that allow us to quickly react, which is, your bill of good, bill of sales, so you know which those vulnerabilities are, but also that continuous testing where we are pushing vendors to start to make those adjustments, especially when they get called out or they're using vulnerable things over and over. We've got to, as consumers, make that push because they have no commercial incentive to do that. We're playing with subsidized hardware and software that they're getting ad data and other useful stuff from us. So there's really not a big incentive for them to design it from the ground up with security in mind.
Sorry, I was waiting for someone else.
Profound. That was
drop the mic.
Well,
boom.
So the one thing I'll say is that software bill of materials is that's what I think you were talking about, right, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay. Software bill of materials is huge and coming out. It's getting bigger than ever. Like software bill of materials. Chris Blask was with Unisys. He's now with Cybeats. Yep. They will actually. So it's interesting. Software bill of materials are the bill of materials. Everything, every library, every DLL, every chunk of code in your software. What's interesting is that there are companies that are lying on their SBOMs. So there's a company, Cybeats, I think Chris Blask's company, that actually will take a binary and build an SBOM out of decompiling it and reverse engineering it. And it's fascinating looking at the SBOM that they provide and the one that's built from their binaries and going, that's interesting. So I'll just leave that there.
at some point, I hate to bring this one in, but at some point we are going to be at a point where your browser, your operating system, or what your security company is telling you for a configuration to only utilize software that has known good bill of materials, and maybe that's backed by something like blockchain, where it's evaluating all those libraries, the binary, the hashes of those libraries, and through, we've been relying on certs and company reputation for a while. What happens when you browse and actually all of that is decompiled and evaluated against something that is non-retributable like a blockchain? That may be where we end up with Web3.
Blockchain and Web 3.0 solves all problems.
Yep.
You could NFT the S-bomb.
S-bomb the NFT.
That's right.
Why not both?
We're gonna mint that software package.
But you know what we're gonna have to do? We're gonna have to solve Web.
Josh and Lee just went head to hand.
And we're gonna have to solve Web 3 with Web 4.
Oh, I'm gonna hurt you.
Next generation.
Well, there goes my CI/CD pipeline. Oh man.
Web 3 NG, next generation.
Well, I think it begs a question, and I'll put this one to Brian: is how do we evaluate and validate our cybersecurity solutions that we're relying on today? It sounds like, Brian, you kind of play in this space of the security software I buy. How do I validate that? How do I evaluate it? It's a huge problem we have today.
It is, because in many cases, you're relying on the reputation of the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
You're relying on how they respond to questionnaires you may send out to them. You can try and run tests on it. So there are only certain things you can do. You can, so you can run a pilot scheme and see how well it does. But in many cases, you might only be working in a limited environment, and how it works in the real world
mm-hmm.
might be completely different as well. So I think, though, where a lot of things are moving is that it's pushing more and more into the cloud. And my concern would be, how do we make sure the software being used in the cloud is secure, and how is the security software that we're using as well in that, both in the cloud and I suppose on the endpoints. They're the two areas that we're going to really need to focus on. Our company, my company, we're all working remotely now. We're working solely in the cloud. I have a computer room, and that I could turn the servers off, and it's not going to have any major impact on the day-to-day business because we're up there in the cloud. Cybersecurity software, just because it's got cybersecurity on it, doesn't mean it's any more secure than any other piece of software you buy as well. And in many cases, it can pose a bigger risk to users if it's not installed properly or it's not secured properly. Because if you take antivirus software and anything else like that, that often needs elevated privileges or access to sensitive areas on the device to be able to operate. So we do need independent. It probably. Sorry, Paul. I'm kind of trying to figure out how best to describe this, but I think maybe eventually it may be some sort of independent, a certification scheme, as I said,
mm-hmm.
EU that all software has to go through, and that there will be countries will appoint bodies that will have the expertise to provide these certifications and say, yes, we have reviewed either the source code or we've run various tests on this, and in our opinion, it meets the standards that we need.
Yeah, and the challenge with that, Brian, right, is that has to be continuous, right? The struggle we have here in our own labs group is trying to keep up with it, right? And we end up now doing more one-offs just because of the sheer amount of volume of work it is.
Yeah, and very often we think about computers when we're talking about software, but look at the mobile devices we have and how quickly apps are updated. Nearly every time you mm-hmm. turn on your phone, another app is being updated. And how does that, that continuous update and new features and everything being added into apps and applications and services, etc. That is a process that we will need to have some way of verifying that and making sure that they come out secure. That's the challenge. That's the challenge, as I said earlier on, that we need to get different disciplines working together. So you have people like me, the compliance geeks, the policy pushers, who are saying this is how we should be doing things, and then we have people who are the techies going, well, how are we going to do that? And it's working together that we can make things more secure. And this is why I do worry about sometimes this type of conversation, is that we have certain parts of our community in our sector will go, that's bullshit, that's rubbish. Why are we even talking about certification? We don't need to worry about it. The blockchain is going to fix everything. We don't need certification. We're professionals. We live and die by our reputations. I'm a fantastic pen tester. I don't need to be certified or have some sort of certificate to say I'm good at my job. I can do it, but here in Ireland, if I want to hire a plumber to fix my plumbing in the house, they have to be registered and licensed by the government to provide that practice. But you can have somebody come in and upgrade your firewall, and it could be that there's no verification of independent verification who they are. So I think we need to all work together to get the different brains thinking together and sort of saying, look, these are the challenges we have. How can we, if we're going to have a certification scheme in place, in that we have this way of verifying or in providing trust in the software that we're using, how technically can we do that? Given the challenge we just talked about, how regularly the software is updated, be that apps on phones or cloud services or on PCs. And what do we do about legacy systems? We're still going to have legacy systems. I have clients who are still running critical services on Windows XP because they're on Windows XP. It's embedded with XP in critical devices that they've invested millions of euros in, and to replace them is going to cost millions of euros again.
And there's no incentive in that environment, right? With cybersecurity, there might be a little more of incentive to support more modern operating systems and software. I do want to hear from Paul, who runs a cybersecurity company and makes software that we use.
I actually have a question for Brian, a tough question. Brian, do you think there's a deadline? Like, when do we need to get all this work done? Is there something coming technology-wise that's critical enough, important enough? Here, I'll go farther out in the future than I think is the actual answer. Let's say before we upload software into our own brains or have Neuralink type connections.
The Amazon show the feed.
What's the deadline? When do we need to fix this problem by across the industry, across the whole system?
Oh, it's a good question, Paul. A deadline. I do think we need to start seriously looking at it, because everything we have now is connected to the internet. We're looking at autonomous vehicles coming along, and how secure are we going to feel sitting in a car that is driving along at 60, 70 miles an hour? You don't want a patch update in the middle of that journey,
Well, the answer for one company, I don't want to out too many people, but if you dig around automated vehicle companies, at least one of them has hired some of the smartest people in security to do their security program. And again, I don't want to out them. You can do your own research to figure that out. Yeah. But there's 3 people that work for one of those companies that are the best in our field at that, right? And that's important, but that's not every industry.
No, it's not. But we are getting to the point where we are so dependent on the internet and cyber that it is becoming. It is critical, and we need to have this problem solved and addressed, and not to be overly dramatic, but we need to do it before people start dying because of some mistake a software vendor has made somewhere along the line in their code, and there's no accountability at the end of the day for them.
I think we're well.
I'm not a solicitor, but there may be,
I think we're well past that deadline, honestly. Like, if you look at ransomware, if it's not taught us anything, it is that we as a society are very vulnerable. You look at our food supply when the meat supply taking place, we've got a very short supply line for food, critical infrastructure like water and power, where mass chaos markets start to crash, very tangible things start to happen. And so I think we're well past that point, and our ability, the challenge is even bigger than just software and bill of materials and goods. The challenge, we've got firmware that now has BIOS rootkits that we've known about for a while that can execute code. So now we have to look at chips, where our chips are coming from, our supply chain on those chips, what our hypervisors, our clouds are all running on. How do we verify that our cloud providers' hardware is good? It doesn't have backdoors. The chips aren't backdoored. We're not able to do a lot of that. And everything is moved to the cloud, where we've got SaaS applications holding critical data that manage our day-to-day life, and if it goes down, that is a bad day. So I think we're well past the point of we need to get this stuff addressed and fixed. It's just, how do you go about doing it? The logical ways, and regulation may be one, cybersecurity, insurance. There's a lot of problems to fix here, and I don't think we've found anything that's new or novel in the last 20 years that's actually done a good job. And so we really have to start being creative and doing what we do, and that's hack ways to make this actually start to begin to look better and do better things.
I just want to point out that Paul somewhat skirted my question of regulation and compliance and certification for cybersecurity software companies. I know you didn't do that on purpose, but I want to get your take on that. Obviously, in your position.
Yeah, I feel fortunate that we are, and I disagree with Brian on one thing he said, which is that security companies are just as insecure as other software companies. I think we are in a unique advantage, and I don't mean just Polarity, but companies that are run by folks who have a security background have a leg up for sure. Now, we're all vulnerable. All software has bugs. All software has vulnerabilities. That's just the nature of the game. But we don't
have this
secure.
Unique ability to write software that doesn't have flaws.
Everybody has vulnerabilities. Everybody has bugs. But we are a leg up, I would say, from our peers who have no security background, and they're building things out without having that mentality, especially when it comes from like a starting architecture perspective, right? One of the fortunate things we're able to do is when we started, before we wrote any code, we were able to build a high-level architecture that was a more secure way of doing it than if we were just not security professionals. Anyway, one side on that. I mean, I think it is important to...
Also, we use our own tools. My experience working for cybersecurity vendors is that the internal teams have full access to all the tools that you create. And so, that it is somewhat of a leg up as well. I mean, it's not perfect, right? It's not making you impervious to attacks, but it does help.
Let's say 5 of the 6 first employees at Polarity were security professionals or had done something professional in the security world.
Some of those were really, really good.
Yeah, many of them were really, really good. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tyler. That being said, it's still an important problem, and I think the problem is summed up in the 2 last responses, and kind of taking some of Tyler's response there with cloud and environments. It comes back to trust. The more we're trusting other parties, whether that's someone hosting our data, hosting our hardware, giving us firmware, giving us software, the more of an urgent problem, and we're past that deadline to fix this problem, exists. I don't want a self-driving car. I don't want to put my kids in a self-driving car thinking that there's a 0-day exploit just ready to be found in that car. I would rather it be architected from a high level. Maybe it doesn't have internet connectivity except for certain times. And when it's driving,
you shouldn't worry. It's not waiting to be found. Tyler already found it. It's okay.
Did he tell anyone? Is he keeping it in his back pocket, Tyler?
Did he sell it to the Russians?
Gotta have that backup plan, those doomsday preppers. Doomsday prepper for 0 days. What do you say?
Josh, Lee, go ahead, Lee.
I keep thinking about the other end of the scale, and where we've got a bit of a culture challenge, is that if you have a business organization that, say, has a complicated ERP system, their tolerance for patch and update is probably once, and an exception, twice a year, which is at the other end of the scale from the model that Paul described of a hosted cloud environment where we're doing a lot of continuous updates, because for that business unit, stability is key. And so getting them off of that system. This is almost like getting the XPCNC machine updated, except it's software. It's a real challenge, and I don't know how to change that culture to say, we can achieve stability if we can keep you updated, but that's a battle that also has to be won, I believe, or at least addressed.
Yeah. And Brian, back to your point, legacy software is still a thorn in our side.
Oh, it's in everybody's side, I have a client running a system on a Polaris box.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all suffer from it in some capacity. I mean, I know I have systems that I'm like, yeah, that's now legacy, right? And I got to carve out the cycles to deal with it, and we don't always do that. I think we all can't sit here and say we don't have some kind of legacy software.
My BlackBerry stopped working a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I had to do some, I won't say updates to some legacy stuff at my home network just the other day. Mm-hmm. We got Verizon Fios eons ago when we moved into our new house, which was like 8 years ago. And in order for the DVRs to get the program guide information, so they can record shows and you know what's on and all that type of stuff, it uses a device.
This is the PDOS.
Yeah, the PDOS.
CPDOS.
Yeah, the CPDOS. And so they ended it's the Verizon Fios router that they give you is a bridge effectively between the Ethernet network and the coax network.
Yeah, crappy Action Tech thing.
Yeah, and turned all that shit off, put it behind the firewall, and it just does its thing and it works until it gets a CPDOS, which is the cat pee denial of service, because the cat pissed on it and it stopped
Larry,
working.
Were you pissed off when that happened?
It's better to be pissed off than pissed on, right? Just ask my Action Tech router, right? So I'm like, this legacy piece of crap. Oh, I've got a spare. Oh wait, I threw it away this summer because I haven't needed it in 8 years, so I threw it away.
What you're saying is they R. Kelly'd your router?
It smells like R. Kelly's sheets. Piss. But I had to go buy a new one from eBay. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean a new one.
New one, yeah. Still, yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, I know it's a tough act to follow, but closing thoughts, anything you want to announce or leave us with today?
I suppose hopefully I really enjoyed the conversations. Really, I've learned a lot, and I hope those who listen to the podcast have learned a lot as well. Again, I just ask people not to be polarized over this. I think we as an industry need to improve. We have a responsibility, I think, as professionals to make this world a better, safer place for everybody, and we need to work across the disciplines to make sure we can get we can move it on. How quickly do we need to do this? It's I think just Tyler was right. We have passed the deadline, and I'm tired of there being watershed moments in cybersecurity. Every major breach, it's another. This is the watershed moment where things are going to change, and things haven't changed. We need to initiate the change. We need to make the changes ourselves.
Brian, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security. Oh wait, we could ask Brian the 5 questions. We haven't asked you. I don't know if the last time you were on, we asked you 5 questions. Hold on.
But we're gonna ask him again.
We're gonna ask him again. All right, Brian, you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Is there a prize?
No.
There's also no wrong answer, so
yeah, there's that.
Oh, okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
okay.
It's not a quiz. 3 words. 3 words to describe yourself.
Oh, Irish, tall, old.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ooh, that's a good question. And it's scary that I'm actually thinking about it. I'm actually going through what weapons I would use to see how much I'll get away with it. Foxglove seeds, because they're very hard to trace.
Digitalis.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
It's just me.
Your favorite hacker movie?
Hackers.
Yes. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise?
Liam Neeson and Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie is still the most popular answer for mom. I don't know why that is, but it speaks to something about
movie
us
hackers.
insecurity.
Just said it.
Yeah, there you go.
Oedipus would be proud.
Brian, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. It was lovely talking with you as always.
Thank you for having me, folks. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
With that, take a short break. Come back with the security news. Stay tuned.